The encrypted message arrived at 3:47 a.m. Moscow time, cutting through the secure channels of the General Staff building like a blade through silk. Colonel Viktor Petrov stared at the glowing screen in his dimly lit office, his coffee growing cold as the words burned themselves into his memory. What he was reading would either save Russia or destroy everything he had sworn to protect. The message was brief, clinical in its brutality: Operation Crimson Dawn approved. Nuclear deployment authorized. Target coordinates follow. But it was the signature at the bottom that made Viktor's blood freeze. His own name, forged with surgical precision, authorizing a first strike that would plunge the world into nuclear winter. Viktor had spent 23 years climbing the ranks of the Russian military, earning his position through merit, loyalty, and an unwavering dedication to his motherland. He had served in Chechnya, survived the brutal winters of Arctic training, and commanded respect from soldiers who would follow him into hell itself. But now, someone was using his identity to orchestrate the unthinkable. The colonel's mind raced as he cross-referenced the message with official protocols. The encryption was perfect, the authorization codes legitimate, the routing impeccable. Whoever had crafted this deception possessed intimate knowledge of Russian military systems that should have been impossible to obtain. More disturbing still, the message had been sent through channels that required his personal biometric clearance that only he possessed. But Viktor knew with absolute certainty that he had never authorized any nuclear deployment. The question that haunted him as he sat in the pre-dawn darkness was simple yet terrifying. If he hadn't sent this message, who had, and how far up the chain of command did this conspiracy reach? By dawn, Viktor had made his decision. He would have to investigate this alone, trusting no one within the military hierarchy until he could determine the scope of the deception. One wrong move, one misplaced trust, and he could find himself branded a traitor, or worse, become the scapegoat for a nuclear catastrophe he had tried to prevent. His first stop was the Strategic Rocket Forces Command Center in the basement levels of the General Staff building. The facility was a fortress within a fortress, protected by multiple layers of security that would make penetration nearly impossible for an outsider. Nearly impossible, but not entirely, as Viktor was beginning to realize. Captain Alexei Volkov, the overnight communications officer, looked up with surprise as Viktor entered the secure facility. "Colonel Petrov, sir. You're here early. I need to review the overnight message traffic," Viktor said, his voice betraying none of the turmoil churning beneath the surface. "Specifically, any communications bearing my authorization." Volkov's fingers danced across his keyboard, pulling up the logs. "There was one message, sir. Sent at 0347 hours through your personal channel. Quite urgent, from what I could see. Show me the routing data." As the information populated on the screen, Viktor felt his suspicions crystallize into cold certainty. The message had indeed been routed through his personal authorization channel, but the originating terminal was listed as his office computer, the same computer he had been using to read emails when the message was supposedly sent. Someone had not only duplicated his credentials but had done so with such sophistication that the system itself believed he had sent the authorization. "Captain, I need you to trace this message backward through every relay point. I want to know every server it touched, every encryption key it used, every microsecond of its journey." Volkov's face showed confusion, but he complied without question. Military discipline ran deep, and colonels didn't explain themselves to captains. But as the trace results began appearing on screen, Volkov's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Sir, this is unusual. The message shows multiple relay points that don't exist in our current network architecture. It's as if it was routed through ghost servers. Viktor leaned closer, studying the data. The routing showed the message bouncing through a series of servers that were listed in the system directory but were physically disconnected months ago during a security upgrade. Yet somehow, the message had traversed these phantom pathways as if they were still operational. Captain, who else has accessed this information? No one, sir. The message was classified under your personal authorization level. I'm the only one who has seen the routing data. Viktor made a decision that would define everything that followed. Captain Volkov, what I'm about to tell you will test everything you believe about duty and loyalty. That message was not sent by me. Someone with extraordinary access to our systems has forged my authorization for what appears to be a nuclear first strike. I need your help to trace the real source, but I need to know, can I trust you? The young captain's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. Sir, if someone is using our systems to authorize unauthorized nuclear deployment, then stopping them is the highest form of loyalty to Russia. What do you need me to do? But that was only the beginning of Viktor's journey into a conspiracy that reached deeper into the Russian military establishment than he had imagined possible. As the morning progressed and his investigation intensified, Viktor began to uncover evidence of a shadow network operating within the very heart of Russian defense systems. The breakthrough came when Volkov discovered that the ghost servers weren't actually disconnected. They had been secretly reactivated and were running parallel operations invisible to the standard monitoring systems. Someone had created a hidden command structure that could issue orders using stolen credentials while leaving virtually no trace of their activities. Colonel, you need to see this, Volkov said, his voice tight with tension. I've found 17 other messages sent through these ghost servers in the past month. All using stolen credentials from high-ranking officers. All authorizing increasingly aggressive military actions. Viktor studied the list of intercepted communications, and a chilling pattern emerged. The messages showed a systematic escalation of military posture, each authorization building upon the previous ones to create a framework for what could only be described as preparation for total war. Tank divisions had been quietly repositioned, nuclear submarines had received updated targeting protocols, and strategic bomber crews had been placed on enhanced readiness status, all through forged authorizations that appeared legitimate to the receiving units. Who received these orders? Viktor asked. That's the most disturbing part, sir. They were all sent to units commanded by officers who have been vocal critics of the current administration's military policies. If these operations were to proceed and then be discovered as unauthorized, it would implicate exactly the officers who have been pushing for military reform. The implications hit Viktor like a physical blow. Someone was orchestrating a massive false flag operation designed to discredit the reform movement within the Russian military while simultaneously pushing the country toward a conflict that could trigger global catastrophe. The nuclear authorization bearing his forged signature wasn't just about starting a war. It was about ensuring that any investigation would lead back to officers like himself who had been advocating for strategic restraint. Viktor realized he was looking at a conspiracy that transcended simple military coup attempts. This was a sophisticated operation designed to manipulate Russia into a conflict while ensuring that the blame would fall on exactly the people who would have opposed such actions. The question that tormented him was, who possessed both the technical capability and the institutional access necessary to orchestrate such an elaborate deception? The answer began to emerge as Viktor and Volkov dug deeper into the hidden network. The ghost servers were sophisticated, but they weren't perfect. Buried in the routing data were microscopic digital fingerprints that pointed toward a source that made Viktor's blood run cold. Captain, cross-reference these routing signatures with known FSB cyber warfare protocols, Viktor ordered. The results confirmed his worst fears. The digital fingerprints matched classified FSB cyber operations that were supposed to be used exclusively against foreign targets. Someone within Russia's premier intelligence service was using state-of-the-art cyber warfare tools against their own military establishment. But Viktor's investigation was about to take a turn that would transform him from hunter to hunted. As he prepared to document his findings and present them to senior leadership, an encrypted message appeared on his terminal, sent through his own compromised credentials. Colonel Petrov, your unauthorized investigation has been noted. Report to Conference Room 7 immediately for debriefing. Come alone. Viktor stared at the message, understanding that he had reached the point of no return. Someone knew about his investigation, knew about his discoveries, and was now summoning him to what could very well be his own execution. But he also knew that backing down now would mean abandoning any hope of preventing the catastrophic war that the conspiracy was designed to trigger. He turned to Captain Volkov. If I don't return from this meeting, take everything we've discovered to General Dimitrov. He's the only senior officer I trust to be clean in this mess. Can you do that? Volkov nodded grimly. Yes, sir. But Colonel, what if General Dimitrov is part of this? It was a question that Viktor had been dreading, but one that had to be faced. In a conspiracy this sophisticated, with this level of institutional access, no one could be automatically trusted. Then, Captain, Russia may be beyond saving. Viktor made his way through the corridors of the General Staff building toward Conference Room 7, acutely aware that he might be walking toward his death. The building that had been his professional home for over 2 decades now felt like enemy territory, every shadow potentially concealing a threat, every familiar face potentially belonging to a conspirator. Conference Room 7 was located in the secure section of the building, accessible only to personnel with the highest clearance levels. As Viktor approached the door, he noticed that the usual security guards were absent, a detail that could be either routine or ominous, depending on who had arranged this meeting. Viktor entered the room to find 3 men waiting for him. He recognized 2 immediately: General Boris Kozlov, Deputy Chief of the General Staff, and Alexander Petrov, a senior FSB official whose presence confirmed Viktor's worst suspicions about intelligence service involvement in the conspiracy. The third man was unfamiliar, middle-aged, wearing an expensive civilian suit that marked him as either a high-ranking government official or a powerful oligarch. Colonel Petrov, General Kozlov began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, please sit down. We have much to discuss. Viktor remained standing. Sir, I need to report a serious security breach in our nuclear command systems. Someone has been. We know exactly what you've discovered, the FSB official interrupted. The question is what we do about it now. The civilian spoke for the first time, his voice cultured and precise. Colonel, allow me to introduce myself. I am Sergei Volkov, senior advisor to the presidential administration. What you have stumbled upon is a sanctioned operation of the highest classification level. Viktor felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Sanctioned operation. Sir, I've uncovered evidence of forged nuclear authorizations, manipulation of military communications, and systematic deception that could trigger global conflict. How can such activities be sanctioned? General Kozlov leaned forward. Colonel, you have always been an exemplary officer. Your record shows unwavering loyalty and exceptional competence. That is why you're being offered a choice rather than facing immediate consequences for your unauthorized investigation. What kind of choice? The FSB official opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. You can join this operation, with full knowledge of its scope and objectives, or you can be permanently reassigned to duties that will prevent any further interference with national security operations. Viktor looked at the documents, recognizing classified operational plans that outlined a systematic campaign of military escalation designed to provoke specific responses from NATO forces. The plans were comprehensive, sophisticated, and absolutely terrifying in their implications. "This is madness," Viktor said quietly. "These operations will inevitably lead to nuclear conflict." "Not conflict," Sergei Volkov corrected. "Calculated pressure designed to achieve strategic objectives without actual warfare. The nuclear authorizations you discovered are part of a carefully orchestrated demonstration of resolve designed to influence Western decision-making." Viktor studied the faces of the three men, searching for any sign that they understood the catastrophic risks inherent in their strategy. What he saw instead was the cold certainty of people who believed their cause justified any means necessary to achieve it. "And if the West calls our bluff, if these demonstration exercises spiral beyond our control," General Kozlov's expression hardened, "then we will have learned whether Russia still has the will to defend its vital interests, or whether we have become too weak to survive in a hostile world." No one expected what came next. Viktor's response would determine not only his own fate but potentially the fate of millions of people whose lives hung in the balance of this shadow war being waged through forged communications and phantom authorizations. "Gentlemen, I took an oath to defend Russia against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What you're describing isn't defense, it's reckless endangerment of everything we claim to protect. I cannot and will not participate in operations that treat nuclear war as an acceptable risk." The silence that followed Viktor's declaration stretched for nearly a minute. The three men exchanged glances that communicated volumes about the decision they had already reached before this meeting began. Sergei Volkov was the first to speak. "Colonel Petrov, your position is noted and regretted. General Kozlov will brief you on your new assignment." But Viktor had no intention of accepting reassignment to some remote posting where he could be neutralized while the conspiracy proceeded toward its catastrophic conclusion. As General Kozlov began outlining Viktor's transfer to a weather monitoring station in the Arctic, Viktor was mentally preparing for the most dangerous gamble of his life. "Sir, I'll need 48 hours to arrange my affairs and brief my replacement," Viktor said, his voice betraying none of the desperate planning racing through his mind. 12 hours, General Kozlov replied. "Your transport departs tomorrow at 0600. Viktor saluted and left the conference room, knowing that he had perhaps 12 hours to expose a conspiracy that could destroy civilization. But as he walked through the corridors of the General Staff building, he realized that Captain Volkov was no longer at his post, and neither were any of the files they had compiled during their investigation. The young captain had vanished, along with every piece of evidence Viktor had gathered about the shadow network operating within Russian military systems. Viktor was now completely alone, facing a conspiracy with unlimited resources and institutional backing, armed only with his knowledge and a determination to prevent nuclear catastrophe. Viktor's next 12 hours became a desperate race against time and overwhelming odds. Using emergency protocols and personal contacts built over 2 decades of military service, he began reaching out to officers he trusted, trying to build a network of resistance to the shadow operation. But each contact revealed the terrifying scope of the conspiracy. Officers who should have been reliable allies reported that they had received new orders through legitimate channels, orders that aligned perfectly with the escalation strategy Viktor had discovered. The shadow network wasn't just forging authorizations, it was systematically repositioning pieces on a global chessboard in preparation for a game that could end in nuclear fire. Viktor's investigation revealed that the conspiracy extended far beyond the Russian military. Intelligence intercepts suggested coordination with sympathetic elements in other nations, creating a web of mutual provocation designed to escalate tensions to a breaking point where nuclear demonstration would seem like the only viable option. As dawn approaches and Viktor's window of opportunity closes, he faces an impossible choice. He can attempt to expose the conspiracy through official channels, knowing that those channels are likely compromised and that his efforts will probably result in his own elimination. Or he can go underground, becoming a fugitive from the very system he has served faithfully for over 2 decades. But Viktor's decision is made for him when he discovers that Captain Volkov is not missing. He's dead, killed in what official reports describe as a training accident that occurred just hours after Viktor's meeting in Conference Room 7. The message is clear. Those who threaten the shadow operation will not survive to tell their story. Viktor realizes that his own elimination is probably imminent, scheduled to occur as soon as his transport reaches the remote Arctic station where witnesses will be scarce and explanations unnecessary. With less than 2 hours remaining before his scheduled departure, Viktor makes the decision that will define the remainder of his life. He chooses to run, but not to hide. Instead, Viktor begins implementing a plan that will either expose the conspiracy to the world or result in his death as a traitor to the state he has served faithfully. Using skills learned in 2 decades of military service and contacts built through years of professional relationships, Viktor goes underground with one mission: prevent the shadow network from triggering the nuclear demonstration that could spiral into global catastrophe. Viktor's transformation from loyal colonel to underground resistance fighter begins with the most difficult decision of his life: abandoning his identity, his career, and everything he has built in order to serve a higher loyalty to humanity itself. As he disappears into the pre-dawn darkness of Moscow, Viktor carries with him the knowledge that could save millions of lives, if he can survive long enough to use it. The Shadow Network's response to Viktor's disappearance is swift and comprehensive. Within hours, his photograph appears on security bulletins throughout the Russian Federation, accompanied by allegations of treason, theft of classified materials, and collaboration with foreign intelligence services. The man who had tried to prevent unauthorized nuclear operations is now branded as the very traitor he had tried to expose. But Viktor's military training serves him well in his new role as a fugitive. Years of tactical planning and operational security provide him with the skills necessary to evade the massive manhunt launched against him. More importantly, his reputation within the military creates a network of sympathetic officers who provide covert assistance even as they publicly support the official narrative of his treachery. Viktor's underground resistance grows slowly but steadily as more officers begin to question the increasingly aggressive orders they are receiving through official channels. The Shadow Network's success begins to work against it as the scope of military escalation becomes too obvious to ignore. Tank commanders report ammunition allocations that exceed any realistic training requirement. Submarine crews receive targeting packages for missions that make no strategic sense. Bomber pilots are briefed on flight patterns that can only be preparation for first strike operations. The turning point comes when Viktor manages to establish contact with General Dimitrov, the senior officer he had trusted Captain Volkov to approach if the investigation went wrong. General Dimitrov has been conducting his own quiet investigation into the unusual orders flowing through military channels, and Viktor's information provides the missing pieces of a puzzle that reveals the true scope of the shadow operation. Viktor, "What you've uncovered goes beyond anything I imagined possible," General Dimitrov tells him during a clandestine meeting in an abandoned warehouse outside Moscow. "The shadow network isn't just manipulating our systems, they're using our own military to create the conditions for the very conflict they claim to be preparing us to win." Together, Viktor and General Dimitrov begin building a coalition of senior officers who recognize that the shadow operation poses an existential threat to Russia itself. The conspiracy's strategy of nuclear demonstration through manufactured crisis is revealed as a path toward national suicide disguised as strategic brilliance. But the shadow network is not passive in the face of growing resistance. As Viktor's underground coalition expands, they face increasingly sophisticated efforts to discredit, eliminate, or co-opt their members. The conspiracy demonstrates resources and capabilities that suggest backing from the highest levels of government, making it unclear whether they are fighting rogue elements or official policy implemented through unofficial channels. The climax of Viktor's resistance comes when the shadow network moves to implement the final phase of their operation, a staged incident designed to justify the nuclear demonstration that will supposedly restore Russian strategic credibility. Viktor and his allies have less than 72 hours to prevent an event that could trigger global nuclear exchange. The planned incident involves a false flag attack on Russian territory using weapons that will be traced to Western sources, providing justification for the nuclear response that has been authorized through forged communications. Viktor realizes that stopping this attack requires him to risk everything in a direct confrontation with forces that have demonstrated their willingness to kill anyone who threatens their operation. Viktor's final gambit involves using his knowledge of Russian military systems to turn the shadow network's own tools against them. With help from loyal officers who have infiltrated the conspiracy's communication channels, Viktor broadcasts the truth about the shadow operation to every military unit in the Russian Federation simultaneously. The broadcast reveals the forged authorizations, exposes the phantom server network, and documents the systematic manipulation of military communications that has been driving the escalation toward nuclear conflict. More importantly, it provides irrefutable evidence that the shadow network has been using patriotic rhetoric to mask operations that will ultimately destroy the very nation they claim to be protecting. The response to Viktor's broadcast is immediate and dramatic. Military units across Russia refuse to follow orders that cannot be verified through secure channels. Nuclear forces stand down pending clarification of legitimate command authority. The shadow network's carefully constructed operation collapses as the deception at its heart is exposed to the light of truth. But Viktor's victory comes at tremendous personal cost. The broadcast that saves Russia from nuclear catastrophe also confirms his status as a fugitive from official justice. The shadow network may be exposed, but the government officials who provided its backing cannot allow their involvement to be revealed without triggering a political crisis that could destroy the current regime. Viktor faces a choice between exile and elimination, between disappearing forever or facing trial as a traitor who will be convicted regardless of the evidence in his favor. He chooses a third option that reflects the same moral courage that drove his initial resistance to the shadow network's operations. Viktor surrenders himself to military authorities, demanding a public trial where all evidence of the shadow network's activities can be presented openly. His decision forces the government to choose between prosecuting a man who prevented nuclear war or admitting that such a conspiracy existed within the highest levels of Russian defense and intelligence services. The trial that follows becomes a turning point in Russian military history. Viktor's defense presents irrefutable evidence of the shadow network's operations, forcing a public reckoning with the fact that rogue elements within the security services had brought the nation to the brink of nuclear catastrophe while claiming to serve its interests. Viktor is ultimately acquitted of treason charges, but the political aftershocks of his trial reshape Russian military and intelligence services. The shadow network's exposure leads to widespread reforms designed to prevent similar conspiracies from taking root in the future. More importantly, it establishes precedents for military officers to resist illegal orders, even when those orders appear to come through legitimate channels. Colonel Viktor Petrov retires from military service as a hero to some and a traitor to others, depending on their perspective on the events he helped expose. But history will remember him as the man who chose principle over personal safety, who risked everything to prevent a catastrophe that would have destroyed millions of lives in the name of national strength. The Shadow Network's conspiracy ultimately failed not because of superior firepower or political maneuvering, but because one man chose to investigate an anomaly that others might have ignored. Viktor's decision to question a forged authorization led to the exposure of a plot that could have ended civilization, proving that individual moral courage remains the most powerful weapon against institutional corruption. Years later, as Viktor tends to his small farm outside Moscow, he occasionally receives visits from young military officers who want to understand how one colonel managed to expose and defeat a conspiracy backed by some of the most powerful people in Russia. His answer is always the same: he simply refused to accept that serving his country required him to betray his conscience. The documents recovered from the Shadow Network's operations remain classified, but their existence serves as a reminder that the greatest threats to national security sometimes come from within the very institutions designed to provide protection. Viktor's story becomes a legend within Russian military circles, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unquestioned obedience and the necessity of moral courage in the face of institutional pressure. The encrypted message that started Viktor's journey into conspiracy and resistance was ultimately revealed to be a test, not of his loyalty to the regime, but of his loyalty to the principles that make civilization possible. By choosing to investigate rather than ignore, to resist rather than comply, Viktor proved that individual conscience remains the ultimate safeguard against collective madness. As the sun sets over Viktor's farm, painting the Russian countryside in shades of gold and crimson, he reflects on the choices that transformed him from loyal colonel to underground resistance fighter to reluctant hero. The cost was enormous: his career, his security, nearly his life. But the alternative was unthinkable: a world reduced to radioactive ash because good men chose to follow orders rather than follow their conscience. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to FictionWire Russia. This is a fictional story created purely for entertainment.